Hiraeth is like a longing for something. It could be best understood as a feeling that someone has who is in exile. Someone who is cut off from their mother country could understand the concept of Hiraeth, but it's like a longing for something that is no longer there with you.
A lot of words can't be translated because they're just a feeling. It's just a feeling, it's a longing, it's beyond longing. It's right in my gut, the whole thing. I never want to live anywhere else. I have been away in different places and I only feel connected here. I only feel connected in Wales.
The word Cynefin is one of those words that's like Hiraeth. It doesn't have a direct equivalent in English, so it's quite hard to translate in some ways. The closest English word, I guess, is probably habitat, but there's a very kind of personal quality to the word Cynefin. There's a kind of that sort of habitual sort of nature to it. It's really about your own sense of familiarity or your own sense of belonging, actually, I think is probably a better word. So it's a kind of a deeper form of habitat. There's a kind of a root to it as well, or a rootedness to it.
I was born in Maiden Street down there, 1921. So I am 98. My father worked and his father worked there. His father had an accident there. He fell down the pit and of course he died, of course. And one of these was with him when he was down, fell down in the pit. They use those for snuff, you know. Yes, they all worked in the colliery. But it was very, very hard times. There was not a lot of money there, you know, to keep us. We were 6. And my mother's photos were there with the 2 children. The little girl died. We had the field there to come down and play, you know, and we had baths, swimming baths. We used to come from school there on a Friday and go to the swimming baths. And the town hall, we always went to the town hall and had a dance. Oh, it was really nice. We were happy, although we knew we couldn't have anything. But my mother done her best. When I was living down in Maiden Street, anything wrong, the neighbours would be there, you know, anything they could do. But it's all different, isn't it? Can't expect it now.
Those were the days.
Yeah, you used to go mad when Daddy said the good old days.
He always say good old days. I say good old days. What you talking about? But they thought they were good old days.
So that would be her grandmother and grandfather. So her mother was born in 1890. And these are brothers and sisters. So the landscape around here has changed completely. You know, all the places we used to play have gone. There was the mountain behind, a mountain in front. That was called
As you walk down the
Forge.
road down by Ennis, there used to be a bridge.
Yeah.
There's a railway going across, but it isn't long since they took that away.
Quite a long time.
The bridge with the railway going across the top.
Yeah. And all the steam engines with all the different names. Pamela, Maureen, they all had names. Linda. Yeah.
In a way, they were good old days.
Well, yes.
Don't think of all the accidents that happened there.
Yeah, but, you know...
They were all, they were all friends and they were all ready to help you in the colliery.
Everybody knew everybody else. Very, very tight community. And they looked after each other. And that's the way it was. They're a different breed. My father was a collier. My mother worked in the war down the arsenal in Bridgend, where they used to make the munitions for the war, obviously. I'm one of 6. A couple of my brothers went underground. It wasn't sort of us and them. It was very close-knit community. Everybody knew everybody. You could leave your doors open. You could let your kids up. I've been up all these forestries here as a youngster, up these mountains. Gone out of the house at 8 o'clock in the morning, come back at 5 o'clock in the night. My mother and father wouldn't even worry about me because they knew there were people everywhere who look after you.
A few hundred years ago, all there was a few farms, but then coming through history, we would have had you would have seen develop collieries and ironworks. They've come and gone, and now we're left with our beautiful valley, which we're really proud of. You got the Llangonide area down there on the left, coming through the main town, and Nanty and Caira up there, Garth area down there. What you can see over there, the flat concrete, that was once collieries, and then the collieries went, and Revlon and other industries came there, and they went away. And we're left with that now, so that's going to be developed in the future. But as you can see, it's all a pretty beautiful area from which we're really proud, which I've grew up in and always been here, more or less.
I think it's the camaraderie amongst people. Community as such is quite good. Although there's not much employment here currently. People commute to Bridgend or Cardiff and so on. There is not much going on since all the mines are gone.
I'm proud to live here. I mean, it's a beautiful town. I wouldn't move.
So it's the third tenors and the baritones. That last bit when you've got all the ooze going on, that has to be a little bit more defined. So on those points, take the ooze back a bit and bring the main part through. Okay, so.
I think the culture of singing have always been in Wales. I mean that although I was quite young when we came to live in Wales, every house in the street had a piano in the front room, and I was always singing.
The choral tradition in my sake is quite strong.
The first performance ever of the national anthem was done here in my stake, so that we'd be very proud of that heritage, that's for sure.
My grandma was born in this house. Daisy Irene Evans, October 28th, 1906, at 10 Wood Street, Mysteg, Bridgend County, Wales. Her father was called John Evans, and her mother was Edith Maud Mills. Mysteg is a town in the coal mining valley region of South Wales. The coal industry started to decline after the Second World War, and the last pit in Mysteg closed in 1985.
houses, toilets outside, water outside, no electric light, lamps. I was born here in 1935. There's a tunnel here. Just as you're coming down into Blanhavan, on the side, this tunnel goes right through. They used to bring some coal and the iron from the ironworks in Blanhavan was brought through here, and they brought it over here, and it goes through here, right around our mountain there, right around the Broadinge, and down into the canal in Lamforest. And then they took it out to Newport, took all the iron, went all over the world, the iron, America, all, everywhere. We was 5 boys. We all worked in the pit. I worked there in the pits for 15 years. I went to the pit when I was 15, but I worked on the surface then for so long, just a couple of months, and worked on the surface, and then I went down. It's slavery, it was mine. Terrible. I enjoyed it when I was there, because they were all together. Miners was all together. I mean, when you come here, we was living here, any of them houses you could walk in. People used to come in our house, and we used to their house. People had nothing, so you couldn't steal nothing or anything like that, because we had nothing. That's all you had was your food and your clothes. And later on, then people had motorbikes. There weren't many cars. There were very few cars. And there was a school here, at the back here, big schools, and a church together like. And on that row up there was a chapel on the one end. And of course there was a couple of houses here and there about. There's that pub there, and I go across here and down a bit. There was another pub there, Prince of Wales, how it's called.
My father worked in like a seam of 2'6", on his knees, on his back, on his side. He'd come home black as the ace of spades. My mother would get his tin bath out, put it on the back bailey, as it was called then in the valleys. It was basically you stepped out to the back of the house and you had the patio, as we'd call it now. She'd fill out the steel bath with hot water for him, and he'd jump in and she'd be scrubbing his back and all the coal off him. He'd have his blue scars and his cuts from the work. When I was growing up, I used to see miners with bad injuries. You know what I mean? A friend of mine's father lost his leg, got killed on the top of Caira. Very, very dangerous. You had to have your wits about you. And proud people. Still proud, even the ones you talk to now. If you spoke to colliers who finished in the 80s when the pit shut, if you spoke to them today and they're in their 60s, they'd say they go back down underground tomorrow.
My name is Ken Wilcox. I am 72 years of age. I have worked in the Welsh coal mines for most of my life until I was retired in 1989. This, as you see, we are standing in Hirwain. Tower Colliery, which was closed by the NCB but taken over by the men who worked here. I think it was worked on successfully until about 10 years ago, where it suddenly became unviable. But as you see, it is a listed building. It cannot be pulled down now like the rest of the coal mines. And I think it's a testament to the coal miners of this valley that it stands here and will stand there for many, many years. That's the pit head. Now, obviously, that is the winder house. That's where the big engine was, where the ropes came up, over the wheels and down. I worked 30 years underground. I was a coal-face worker. I rise at 4:30 and I would pick my sandwiches up and I would be on the pit at 6. Now it would still be dark in the winter at 6 o'clock here. But after spending then maybe 10 hours underground and come back up, it was still dark. Well, when I was doing that for 7 days a week, I didn't see any daylight. Of course, I can never forget my comrades, because we are more than workmen, we are brothers. You've got to consider your brother because he was considering you. And that's how we stood, that's how we were safe underground, because it's a terrible industry to work in. It was our lot, we enjoyed it. Someone asked me, would I go back tomorrow? Well, unfortunately, I'm a little too old to go back, and my body has taken a couple of knocks, too many knocks, but if I could, I would go back.
At the height of the industry, which would have been in the 19th century, beginning of the 20th, there were about 14,000 people working as slate miners. It was a very major employer in this part of the world, where previously agriculture had been the dominant industry. It was the Industrial Revolution that brought the slate industry into life, really. The people who worked in it, quite often they would die fairly young from silicosis, which was the lung disease caused by accumulation of slate dust in the lungs. My own grandfather died of that when he was 70. He'd worked from the age of 14 until the age of 70, and he got one period of 2 weeks paid holiday in that time, and then became ill and died of the dust, as they call it. A llwch would be what the old people would say. Where we are now is in the Dorothea quarry, which is in the Nantlle Valley. This quarry was started around about 1820, just after 1820. By 1848, it was producing about 5,000 tons of roofing slate every year. And it reached a sort of peak of production around about the 1870s. It slowly declined, and the place finally closed in 1970. It's been taken back by nature. Nature has recolonized the place, and you've got trees and ferns and bracken. Everything has come back. Nature has reclaimed what was once a barren, desolate slate wasteland. At one time, this was the second biggest slate quarry in the world. And at its peak, it was producing something like 100,000 tons of roof slates every year, which is a phenomenal amount. And it was in production for over 170 years, so it's a really long time. And it was finally closed in 1969, which was 50 years ago. The story of its closure there's a sadness about it, because the management didn't tell the workers that they were going to close the place down. And everyone had gone on their summer holidays from the quarry. And when they were on holiday, the place was closed. They were told that the place wasn't going to open again after they came back. So they never actually got a chance to clear up their workplaces. And up into this quarry there are old sheds where people would shelter. They would go and have their meals there, for example. And they've been left as they were on the day that the people went off on holiday. You know, cups and shoes and things were left. It's like you've heard of the Marie Celeste, the ghost ship. Well, it was a bit like that. It was just abandoned and left. Sometimes people go up there and find things that were left by the quarrymen 50 years ago. Y ddôl a aeth o'r golwg. Yn hal y sarn ystolwg, fe welem lyfni lan, a'r ddôl hynafol honno a gymell hyn o gan. Ac megis gwyrth y gwelem ar lan hen afon hyd, y ddôl a ddaliau pepin yn sblander bore'r byd. Yn hal y sarn y sywedd, ni welwn lyfni mwy, na gwartheg gwirthiol pepin yn ei cynefin hwy. Buan yn dysgodd bywyd, a thrawiaeth llanw a thraidd. Rhyngddom ar ddôl ddi halog, daeth chlytfa'r gloddfa glai.
I've lived here 38 years. Yeah, and didn't intend to live here, but I think it's cast a bit of a spell on you. Look at it. I mean, it's just got an edge to it, which I really love. And it's got this sort of history to it that I love. It's got a kind of practicality as well, because people lived here and they worked here. And even over there, when you go into the Iron Age fort over there, the hill fort, they were mining iron here and they were smelting iron back in AD, 2nd century. I just love those layers of history. It's amazing, isn't it, to think of all the hundreds and hundreds of people who'd be working here. And now you look at it, it's like some ancient ruin, and that's just the working area there. That's not the village. The village is down below. We're going to have a look at now. So the quarries, the slate quarries around here, as opposed to quite a lot of other slate quarries, are actually like mines. They were excavated deep down in the ground like coal was, not like the quarries in other parts of North Wales. Because I'm a sculptor trained, I'm very tactile, so I'm really, really attracted to material, the material of wherever I am, and this slate is just amazing. And you look around and you see the colours that you have on the lichens and the walls. I defy anybody to say it's just grey. I mean, it's a dull day, you see it on a bright day, and these colours, vibrant, they really zing out at you. So there's an artist's impression of the village as it was from some of the history that they have and the colours that they had of it. So it's that there. And then this corrugated building down here, which served as a community centre, was a school. This is the school when it opened in 1909. So this is the old village where the people used to live. Not where they worked, but where the people actually lived. So the only thing I found here that made me think that there was a domestic life taking part was this head here. It's the only thing, and that's why I decided to do my bed, my slate bed. That's what gave me the idea, because it's the one place where male and female are equal. Without the bed, the generations wouldn't continue. You'd have about 12 people living in here for 6 days of the week. I love the walls. I love the lichen on the walls. Isn't it amazing? I had this idea about doing wallpaper. I have taken the wall idea, the wall as witness, quite far, but I still want to come back and do wallpaper. The coal mining areas and the copper mining areas, the women are mentioned, and you get they are valued for what they did. But in the slate mining areas of North Wales, it's visibly absent. The common response from the men was, but the women didn't do anything. Why are you asking about the women in the quarries? It was just the men that did things in the quarry. I said, well, they must have had some role within your life. The women's strength was within community and bringing groups together. They did a lot of singing. They did a lot of community activity. This area and some parts of these quarries and other quarries in North Wales have been put forward as one of the places to be protected for heritage, as a heritage site, so that they don't demolish them, so that there's a bit of history here. You know, there aren't that many places you can go to. I don't think so. Many places that have such a story to tell about the life of people. You're talking about sort of 200 years, really, of people living in this way. And people have stood where we're standing. We have got a big exhibition on in Bangor, and then I'm bringing it to this side, to Blaenau Ffestiniog, and I'm bringing it into the community of Blaenau Ffestiniog, and also in the quarry environment, because a lot of tourists come here, and I just want them to think about the same questions we've been asking.
According to the census, this is where my grandma's family lived in the year 1900. It's in a working-class neighborhood in Swansea, and you can hear the seagulls in the bay nearby. Swansea, or Abertawe in Welsh, is the second largest city in Wales. It used to be called Copperopolis because of its international prominence in the copper industry. Both of my great-grandparents were born here. And around this time, my great-grandfather worked as an upholsterer in an automobile factory. It's also the birthplace of legendary poet Dylan Thomas, and though she'd never been here, my mom used to play a record of his story, A Child's Christmas in Wales, every year. In 1912, my grandma and her family immigrated to the U.S. They arrived on March 3rd on the HMS Campania with her siblings Harold, Lillian, Enid, Willie, and Richard. They settled in Evanston, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago, where they assimilated and became Americans. Though my great-grandfather spoke Welsh, Cymraeg, my grandma didn't. It wasn't taught in school when she was a child, and speaking it in the classroom was forbidden. This is the house where they lived in 1910, a few years before they left for the U.S. I don't remember my grandma ever really talking about Wales, and these 3 houses are all I know about my family's life here.
The mountains are good here. That's Talavan, the further that way, the one with the small rock at the top is Talavan. That's Penagaya, the one that's slightly curved, and the pointed one is Penagada. They were all born here. First of all, Uncle Owen, then my mother, and my Auntie Marjorie, Auntie Olwyn and Dillis, and lastly Tom, and Tom was the farmer here when we lived here during the war. Uncle Tom farmed and he spoke fluent Welsh. There was Welsh spoken in the fields but not in the house. So Tide spoke Welsh and the workers did, but in the house Grandma spoke English only. No one was allowed to speak Cymraeg, but I got lots of little naughty phrases from Uncle Tom. This is my grandma's wedding to my Tide. This is Tide's mother and Tide's father. No, wait a minute, that's Tide's father there. And that's 9. That's Tide Ma, that's the great-grandfather who was the millionaire who had the pigs and the opium. Now this is Grandpa Wagstaff. Where is he? He's there. And he actually is the one who went to America and had the central heating business here, which was really good. So that's the family. That's our wedding. That's Richard and me getting married. It was during the war, and then we went to live in Chester after the war, and have you heard of Hiraeth? I had the longing, so I used to have my holidays here. And then we wanted to move from London. Richard wanted a big studio, he wanted a big pottery. And this came on the market, my childhood home. Isn't that amazing? Oh. Just when we wanted to move, so it was meant to be. Yes, my auntie saw it in the paper, gave it to my cousin. My cousin gave the advertisement to my mother, and my mother sent it to me. And we were up the next day. We bought it the next day. I've been back home now for 30 years, and Richard and I planted this whole wood 30 years ago. And this is where he lies here. This is his grave here. So it's his head's facing the west. This is the coed Goody Hoo, the wood of Goody Hoo. And this wood was actually suggested that we should have trees planted which are native trees. So there's a whole mix of hawthorn, hazel, ash, oak. I don't charge them, and then they do things like the drains and the hedges. So this is the east stone, the air stone, and that when we have the blessing, we bless all the creatures that fly, like the birds, the insects. Then as you go round, this is the fire stone. So it's south, that faces south, that faces east. So this is the fire stone, and lizards, snakes, dragons come into play when you think of this stone. So we have a circle, we cast a circle, and we do a lot of work according to that, which is good. Right, you've got the water stone here, and the creatures of water are all the swimming creatures, you know, like whales, dolphins, fish, tadpoles, frogs, newts, everything. In the next field we've got several ponds. And then you're probably thinking, where's the earth stone? It's here. And the earth is, this is really, if you think in terms of the sunrise, the sun's rising there, at its height there, sinking there, there's no sun, so you've got creatures of the night like the moles, the owls. It's lovely, you wouldn't think you were near Conwy even. It's extraordinary. Now you see this mountain? Well, it's a hill. That is Dinas, this is like the fort, and it's said that Ceridwen lived there. I'm not sure about it, but you know, she could have lived there. Grandma, we ask for your blessing, and also to ask the goddess Ceridwen, the goddess of this place, for help today. Grain goddess Ceridwen, moon mother, shapeshifter, guardian of the white sow, Mam of Taliesin, chaser of the March hare, gifts to us you're giving, wisdom, healing, inspiration, nature, nurture, transformation, boil and bubble, weave your spell, Ceridwen, stir your cauldron, well, blessed be. So we've got the totem pole here. We've got, when Ceridwen's son is supposed to change his shape into, is supposed to become a poet, Gwion Bach, the boy who's stirring the cauldron, actually has some of the liquid, the potion, splash on his finger, and he licks it. And he knows the witch, Ceridwen, will be after him. She changes into a hound, to a greyhound bitch. He changes into the hare, and he's just about to get the hare by the scruff. She's about to get the hare by the scruff of his neck, and the hare looks up and sees a pond and thinks, if I could just hide as a salmon. There's the salmon curved there. But the otter comes, Ceridwen turns into the otter and is about to get him, sharp teeth, claws, when he looks up and he sees a little flock of pigeons at the top, flying around. And he thinks, if I could just be a little pigeon, I could escape. But she changes into a big bird of prey, and he's about to be swallowed by this big beaked creature when he looks down and he sees some grain. Now you can't see, there's a hen there. He changes into the grain, but the hen pecks the grain, and then the grain changes into a little baby, and he's born, and she wants to get rid of him. But just as she's saying, I'll get rid of you, he says, I'm Taliesin of the Radiant Brow, my name liveth then and now. And she's amazed, and she puts him in a little boat, and he floats right out to Deganwy near Conwy, and that's another story. And right at the top you've got the owl, and the owl is like the messenger, Ceridwen's messenger, who looks after this place and the land, and flies by night to see what tricks people are up to. To actually become a poet, you have to go through phases. In a way, it's like the circle, isn't it? You have to be blessed by the air, by the fire, by the water and the earth, and all these creatures. Like you've got the representation of all the different parts of the circle. So you have to go through that structure to be a great poet. You've got to be blessed by all, and also by the Great Spirit.
This place is called Moel Don. It happened in the year 60 AD. Suetonius brought his army to the shore on the mainland, and the Druids and their supporters were waiting for them on the shore here. And he's quite graphic in his description. He says the Druids were standing behind warriors, and there were women with black clothes and their hair all wild, and these women were shouting curses at the Romans, and the Druids were marching behind the troops with flaming torches. And apparently the Roman soldiers were really, really frightened by this display, because they thought they were being cursed by these Druids on the island of Enclosure. And there was a great battle, and the Druids were defeated. And according to Tacitus, they had sacred oak groves, groves of oak trees where they would perform religious rituals. And the Romans destroyed these oak groves. They took axes and they cut down all the trees and burnt them. That's where the great battle that ended Druidry in Britain, that's where it happened. There's a legend in the village that after this great battle of Moel Don on the banks of the Menai Straits, some of the surviving Druids fled north, right up to the north end of the island. And there's a like a hill fort or a hill settlement called Dinas Gunvor, and it's right on the edge of the sea. And he said, the people in the village say that the Druids fled there after the battle, probably to discuss whether they were going to flee to Ireland, whether they were going to throw away their white robes and disguise themselves as ordinary people and mingle with the peasantry until the Romans had gone away. That's folklore that's been passed down the generations, and it's not recorded in any history. It was all linked to the seasons of the year and the relationship between people and the living world, if you like, and that cycle. It was a great circle, if you like. Life was seen as something that was circular. You were born, you grow, you flourish, you decline, you die, and then you're reborn into a new life. So this concept of reincarnation was part of their beliefs. The spirit would come back to life in a new body.
Spirit of this place, Spirit of this circle, we ask for your guidance and inspiration on this our ceremony. Grant, your Spirit, their protection,
and in protection, strength, and in strength, understanding, and in understanding, knowledge, and in knowledge, the knowledge of justice, and in the knowledge of justice, the love of it, and in the love of it, the love of all existences, and in the love of all existences,
the love of Spirit and all goodness.
I've always been interested in folklore and in history. The spirituality that they had that linked them to the land itself. They do two things, modern religions. They cut off human beings from the divine, and they cut off human beings from the rest of the natural world. So it's as if we're being placed in a limbo, almost. We don't recognize our own divinity, and we don't recognize the divinity of nature around us. So that makes us disrespectful to all life, I think. Let us be glad of another's gifts. She bears us as she bears the wheat in the field. Remember, as you begin to gather the harvest of the land, that also you may gather the fruits and seeds of your own soul's harvest. As the fire dies down, let it be relit in our hearts. May our memories hold what the eye and ear have gained.
We swear by peace and love to stand, heart to heart and hand in hand. Mark, O Spirit, and hear us now, confirming this, our sacred vow. We swear by peace and love to stand, heart to heart and hand in hand. Mark, O Spirit, and hear us now, confirming this, our sacred vow. We swear by peace and love to stand, heart to heart and hand in hand. Mark, O Spirit, and hear us now, confirming this, our sacred vow.
Animism, as far as I'm concerned, is where, if you look at it in terms of our modern scientific perspective, in terms of our perspective, we know that everything is made of a fundamental form of energy. And my understanding of animism is that you can perceive the energy of other things and that it has its own sentience. And therefore, for example, if you wished to understand what a tree was like, you would be able to communicate with that tree or understand how that tree is by being very still and by connecting with what the energy of the tree is. And I think most people can do it, they just choose not to. But it's an interesting thing to do, to sit still enough to be able to communicate with the tree and to know what treeness is and to understand how a bird or an animal or a plant might be viewing the world. Yews were a tree which stopped the dead from wandering, so they were quite a useful tree, and they were a portal between the afterlife and this life, and so they had associations of death going back a long way anyway. So that's why they're in churchyards. If you look at stories of early Christian saints, they all talk about things like bears helping them to create their churches, or other animals actually physically helping them to build the churches and to do things. And that seems like there are a lot of connections with beliefs that you find in modern day tribal societies, which would correlate with some of the early Christian beliefs. So I'm guessing that those beliefs were still prevalent in early Celtic Christianity, which is very land and nature based. And it wasn't until the Industrial Revolution when everything had a proper cut-off. But I think before that, the Christian church was very well aware that it was still a threat to its way of being. So those beliefs were frowned on and stamped on.
This is one of the most ancient sites in the Rhondda Valley, but the church was built here because around sort of 1500 years ago there was a massive thunderstorm and lightning struck an oak tree that was growing here. And the oak tree burnt, and after it burnt, there was an image of the Virgin Mary and the baby Jesus actually inside the oak tree. So it became a very Christian holy site. And that statue was taken away by Cromwell. So it was about 300-400 years later that the church in Wales came back and put the new statue here, and it became a site of pilgrimage again. Because right through the medieval period, this was one of the most important pilgrimage sites in Europe. If you're blind, it can help you see. If you've got aches and pains, rheumatism, different things like that, it can ease all that, apparently. And people used to come from all across Britain, all across Europe to here. There was, I think I'm right that it was 2 pilgrimages here were equal to 1 to St. David's. 2 to St. David's were 1 to Rome, and 2 to Rome was 1 to Jerusalem. And even Canterbury Cathedral didn't have that kind of accolade. This was the big boy. Given the story of the oak tree, this miraculous oak tree, the probability is that it was a Druidic presence here right through the Iron Age and probably into the Bronze Age as well. So this is like a really, really ancient site.
Various Christian establishments were built on pre-existing pagan sites. It's an assumption really that the same thing would have happened with sacred springs, and you do see that sort of veneration of sources of water happening in other cultures and other religions.
Crowds on the edge of the seashore, girls from various regions, an innumerable myriad of men are to be found, sick people, cripples and the weak, bustling between the holy wells, hill slopes covered with people like a king's army, people from the countryside, everyone on his knees, wax tapers, candle wicks for health of mind, pipes of wine, everyone with his candle, shirts covered in stains nearby, a miracle as the dead are resurrected. It became well known early in the 12th century, 13th century, when people started making a pilgrimage to the island to visit Dunwen Shrine, which was on the island, to pray for love, and also to visit the holy wells on the island, which became known as healing wells. A lot of miracles are said to be due to the intercessions of Dunwen and also to visiting the holy wells. The wells were used for two main purposes. One was for healing, and a lot of cures were wrought at the wells. The other was for fortune-telling and divination. People would come to the wells to tell the future, see if their sort of romantic intentions would come to pass or not come to pass. And this certainly continued way into the Victorian period. Every community in Wales has its own holy well, or has had its own holy well, and they go back sort of as far as we know, and certainly as back as written records go.
Because you see the sky in it, and you see the landscape in it. It's like another world, but it's this world as well. Just just out the side of your eyes, just that other world. That it's called Anofn in Welsh. The other world. The Arachfyd is literally the other world, but Anofn is the name of the kingdom. It's where the mountains reach the sea, it's on riverbanks, it's pools and lakes and mirrors and, bowls of water as well. There are all those liminal places, and then the places in the day as well, the twilight, the dawn, and the places in the year where spring becomes summer, changings.
This is the far northern edge of the land, on Holyhead Island by the Well of St. Gwenfane, who, according to legend, was chased by Druids to the cliffs, where she was rescued by angels who carried her away. This is a between place, on the cusp of the Irish Sea, the heart of my ancestral lands. Places now called Wales, Ireland, Scotland, and England. The surfaces of both the well and the sea could be entrances to the other world. It is here, in this sacred place, where I scatter a small portion of my mom's ashes. Releasing them into the wind here feels like completing a circle, like a return to a place neither of us had ever been, but had been with us all along.
I had that when I was 14. My father bought it when I was 14. I started shear up by hand, and you put the sheep on a bench.
Yeah.
And you stood behind him, and you start on the belly or whatever. Then you open up the neck and down the side, turn him over and do the other side. But yeah, I've had that since I was 14. So, I use it for ear marking now. We've got to identify the sheep because I use common land, and to know my sheep from somebody else, I put notches in the ears. So this is what I use now to cut the ears. Yeah. The black one there is mine. The one in front, I mostly put orange paint on the rump or on the shoulder. This is belonging to my neighbours in the other valley. We've got to roll it up to send it away. Now and again somebody will come along and ask for some, but that's how it comes off a sheep's back. It's got to be rolled up like this. They won't pay you if you don't. So that's all rubbish in here. It's all bits and pieces. But when they get up, they grade it. Look at it all and see the length of the staple. This kind of thing. Some white ones. They're basically the same as white wool as well. Different sheep. Different type of wool.
It's an odd thing because we have debates in this household quite a bit about it because my son is a vegan and he hates what I do. You know, I only rear the animals for them to be killed. That, you know, if you have animals, that's all they exist for. To be involved with this sort of in this cycle of life, which there's a huge responsibility with it. You know, if I wasn't here, those animals wouldn't be here. Therefore, their welfare is absolutely, ultimately dependent on my looking after them properly. It grounds you when you're involved in the blood and guts of, you know, helping them give birth if that should be necessary, or seeing them in the abattoir, or, you know, if one of them gets sick and you tend it and you care for it and it recovers, and then every year there's birth, every year, and there's always some going to die. There's this kind of, it's like the seasons in a way. Come what may, winter comes round. You might not like it when it's rainy and wet, but there's this kind of inevitability of it all, and that sort of cycle of life and death. It wasn't until a child of 8, on the odd occasion that I visited my grandfather on his farm, that, you know, I first kind of, you know, sort of saw at the deep end what farming is about, with, you know, death and birth and shit and everything. It's like, in a way, habits of a lifetime. I'd find it very difficult to be without it. We have discussions, me and Kieran, what would you do if you didn't have animals? I think while I'm active, I'd find it very difficult to be without them.
The land as a fundamental kind of resource is often something that gets skipped over in political or, you know, kind of historical debates, and people forget how much the land has been, how much people have been separated from the land, historically speaking, and even at present, and that access to land as a resource is a really important tool of empowerment for people.
This is Mynydd Bach,
So we're a few miles inland from the coast, and it's a very special area because it was all once common land. It's heavily symbolic for the idea of ownership or working the land. This was all commonly run, people, different farms around the Mynydd, and even the people on the Mynydd, each shared the land. They all ran their sheep, their cattle, their chickens, their goats, their pigs on this land, and they would all be marked so you would know which animal belonged to which farm.
The Enclosures was the process of privatising common land in the UK, and this took place over quite a long period of time, but the effects were fairly considerable. Common land, which was land which was used cooperatively, it had been used for many generations. It would have been land that people would have used for grazing, for things like cutting peat, gathering wood, that kind of thing. And we know that in Wales, between the end of the 18th century and the end of the 19th century, over 1 million acres of common land was enclosed. So this would have had a considerable effect on the everyday folk of the time, and also an effect on the landscape itself. The historian Carl Pugliani, he actually called the Enclosures a revolution of the rich against the poor. So you get an idea of who was really, who had the power during this period.
So this is Cofiwch Tryweryn, and it simply means remember Tryweryn. Tryweryn was a valley in mid to North Wales that was totally Welsh speaking. And in the 60s, the British government took it upon themselves to drown it, turn it into a reservoir to provide water for an English city in Liverpool. And for a lot of people, this was seen as an attack on Wales.
As it transpired, the village was flooded, the graves were cemented over and, stand there to this day. People were forcibly removed from their village. It was a Welsh-speaking village, exclusively Welsh-speaking village, and people were dispersed and disbanded around the country.
Tryweryn touches a very deep core for me, that we don't get payment for the water. It's our resource. I feel very sad, I almost feel quite tearful about the powerlessness of a lot of communities. And I think historically we've been powerless.
There have been valleys and villages that have been drowned around the UK for decades. I think this is more emotional because it was a village in Wales flooded for a city in England, and I think that's...
They didn't even use it.
No, I know, but I think that's where the
thing.
sense of injustice is. There's always injustice when valleys and villages are displaced for any reason. It can be for progress, it can be for development, it can be for whatever. But the Tryweryn and the Capel Cennin thing, it's that more emotive because it's not what Wales wanted, but Wales didn't get a say.
It was the first time that Wales really realised that we don't have any voice or any representation in the British government. So it sparked numerous protest movements. It sparked some violent action as well. There was a bombing campaign against what was seen as British interference in Wales. But mostly the protests were peaceful, and it sparked renaissance in Welsh, not Welsh culture, in Welsh awareness and the fact that we are a nation.
We were noticing on the news the vandalism and the sledgehammer incident with the original Cofiwch Tryweryn mural in Aberystwyth, and we felt that the way you protect it is you multiply it. You don't have one of them, you have hundreds of them.
Well, as a nation, we are the Cofiwch Tryweryn. Yeah. It's part of our fabric of our social history as well, and we have to remember it and pass it down verbally to the next generation so it doesn't get forgotten.
So we were talking on the Saturday, and we said, let's chuck it up on the side of our wall. And then by the Sunday morning, you and your mates had stuck like an 8 by 15 foot sign on the side of a sweet shop.
People were sort of praising it and saying, oh, it's fantastic, well done. And then it seemed to catch it's caught a bit of a zeitgeist moment, hasn't it, as well, because people want more Welsh. People are more interested in Welsh independence now than ever before. So it's kind of caught that wind there with it, and it's got it in the sails, and it's taken off.
Farewell, the Aberystwyth, farewell, the Benmaes Glas, farewell, the Nôr Castell, a hefyd mor glas. Farewell, the Ben y Parker, farewell, the Fig of Fôr, farewell, o Lesbos Lana, erioed fi'n agor dro.
When I was growing up as a child, I found it really difficult because first of all, the village I came from had a threat of being drowned, or a part of it was going to be drowned for a dam. And then I remember being I must have been very, very little, because I remember this huge, lots of tractors and men and shouting and things, and I think they managed to stop it. There was this very strong activists in South Wales, very, very strong, much more than the North, because of that thing of keeping together. And so they stopped the drowning of the village. Then they found some anthracite just quite close to the agricultural land where I come from. So they sunk a deep mine, and it killed a lot of people because there was methane gas. It killed a whole generation, a couple of generations of men and boys. And then they didn't leave it at that. The National Coal Board just took a raped half the countryside. And at the age of 11, I remember sitting there watching all my blackberry bushes going, and that was the first time I felt this spark of activism, the activist in me, that we were ignored and that we didn't have a voice. And then I became a very strong defendant of the Welsh culture. You know, at the age of 16, you've got to shout about something, so I shouted about that. I can remember sort of asking as a child, who says, why can't we stop these things? And I didn't have a clue who the Queen was. My children didn't when they were little, because why would I talk about the Queen?
Great Britain, you have the Scots, you have the English, you have the Irish, and you have the Welsh. And the Welsh, Irish and Scots are the Celtic part of the lands, whereas the English are invaders, really, Normans. But we value our heritage, we value our songs, we value our language.
We've been an occupied country for the last 700 years, and we still survived, despite the continuing efforts to eradicate us from the face of the earth. But we're still here.
Hawdd I lafurwr hoeddol, hyder ar ddiw ner yn ôl, o gardod drwy gywirdeb, o letu ni necu neb. Ni rydd far yn eithir ar arnawdd, ni char yn ei gyfargawdd, ni ddeulu rhyfel ni ddilyn, ni threisia am ei dda ddyn. Ni bydd rhy gadarn arnam, ni i'r hawl gymedral gam, ni daddas ond ei oddef, nid bywyd, nid byd heb ef. Gwn mai di grifach ganwaith, gantho modd di gyffro maith, gaffel ni'n dawr heb fawr fai, yr arador crwm ar ei rai. No ffed fai pandorau dŵr, yn rhydd Arthur a'n rheithiwr, ni cheffir eithir o'i weithred, a berth Crist i borthi cred, bywyd ni chaiff ni beiwn, pab na cymer awdwr heb hwn, na brenin heilwyn hoiw liw, dien neu bwyll na dyn byw.
For the last sort of 150 years, there's been less and less Welsh history taught. And now, I think for the first time now, they talk in the Welsh Assembly about actually bringing Welsh history into the curriculum. It should never have left, you know. You have to know who you are and what your place in the world is, where you came from, in order to understand where we could go in the future, you know. So if you're taught another nation's history, where does that leave you? You know, where does that leave your nation? Without our history, without our knowledge, will we be here in another 2,000 years? You learn all about the Anglo-Saxons and the Saxon kings. You learn all about the Norman kings, the English kings. You never ever hear about Owen Glyndŵr. You know, you mention Owen Glyndŵr now, most people say, oh, it's a pub. Well, no, it's not. You know, all our princes, our heroes, our people, our history, wiped off the map. You have to know who you are and where you're from. And it's that knowledge of the history that can tie you into a landscape. And you kind of understand the landscape a bit more when you know parts of that history. And then once you start doing that, you understand where your place in that landscape is.
In the 1980s, my grandma wrote a letter about visiting Wales and about a place called Mumbles, which is a small town on the periphery of Swansea with a Victorian-era pier and rows of colorful houses. She wrote about how much she enjoyed her time there and how she visited Oystermouth Castle, where she had memories of playing as a child. My mom and I had talked about traveling in Wales together for years, but it never came to pass. Mumbles is one place I know for sure we would have gone, and she would have loved it. It reminds me a little bit of where I grew up. On this warm summer day, it feels like we're walking together, her absence a presence. You can see the castle from almost everywhere in town, and I slowly make my way toward it through the winding streets. When I arrive at its ancient walls, I take my shoes off to walk the perimeter in my bare feet, as I imagine my grandma might have done over 100 years ago. I feel that by doing this, I can grasp the thread that connects us, my mom, my grandma, and all of the ancestors who came before me from this land. The thread that is in this place, and repair what has been severed by time and forgetting.
About 3,000 years ago, and there were red deer here, and they found lots of footprints, tracks going out into the water. And they now think that this forest that we're in, or the remains of trees, stretched all the way 30 miles across the sea to Ireland. It was a forest, maybe like a swamp forest, with animals like deer and wild boar, maybe even bear, wolves. And there are all these footprints, and you can, if we look closely, you'd actually find them. I think they've even found human footprints, old ones, going out into the sea. And this is where the stories come in. You've got the story that the archaeology is now backing up, that you could walk across the sea here, and you could have walked to Ireland. From Penllyn in the north to Cemais in the south, the sea was once land. And not farmed land, not sluice gates and dikes, no. This was beautiful rivers, lakes, forests, fields, wildflowers, beautifully kept. The smells filled the air. This was the land of Plant Rhys Ddyfn, the children of Rhys the Deep. Rhys was a philosopher, a thinker. And he knew that this land was not safe from the prying eyes of the people who lived on the mainland. So he came up with a plan. He decided that his utopia could be hid by planting a hedge of herbs all the way from Penllyn to Cemais. And when this hedge grew, it would keep his land safe from the prying eyes of the mainland people. And the only way they could see it was if they stood by the single patch of herbs that grew on the mainland. But because nobody knew where that patch of herbs grew, nobody ever saw Rhys's utopia.
I dreamed a dream the other night. Lowlands, lowlands, away my age on. I dreamed a dream the other night. Lowlands, away. I dreamed my love came in my sleep. Lowlands, lowlands, away my John. Her cheeks were wet, her eyes did weep. Lowlands, away. She came to me as my best bride. Lowlands, lowlands, away my John. All dressed in white like some fair bride. Lowlands, away. And bravely in her bosom fair. Lowlands, lowlands, away my John. A red, red rose did my love wear. Lowlands, away. No sound she made, no word she said. Lowlands, lowlands, away my John. Then I knew my love was there.
But the land of Plant Rhys Ddyfn is still there. If you look now, you look closely, with your memory, you might see it. And sometimes, when you're travelling along the train here that follows the line of the beach, you look through the window. You might see a reflection of yourself, but look beyond that reflection. and you might see something more, because we say around here that if all you ever see is a reflection of yourself, you're not looking hard enough. There's something beyond yourself, and that is the land of Plant Rhys-Stubborn, the Welsh utopia. And it's still there to this very day, in our dreams and in our memories. And I'll tell you one last little secret. That the term Plant Rhys-Stubborn in Welsh is a colloquial name. It's like a dialect word. And it means the Tylwyth Teg, the fair folk, the fairies.
This is a story that I was telling when I lived in London before I came here, and to go to the places where, you know, that are they're named in the text. Tom and Amir is named in the text. It's not, oh, it might have been here, it might have been there. It's named in the text, and this place has got these different layers that's been used through the ages, and to come here and tell the story in the place is very, very powerful for me. And through coming to know the places, I feel a much stronger connection with the stories, but also through knowing the stories, it gives me a connection with the places. Amser maith yn ôl, once upon a time, this land was ruled by a great king who was also a mighty magician, and his name was Math ap Mathonwy. And in Math's court was the great wizard Gwydion, a lord of great power. And he set his mind to thinking of how to create a human being. And he knew that even though he was a mighty magician, a splendid sorcerer, alone, even he did not have enough power to do this. So he went to the king, to Lord Math, and together those two great wizards spun a great glamour, a mighty magic, to make a wife for Llew out of flowers. Flowers of oak, flowers of broom, and flowers of meadow sweet. They mixed them together, soft, plump petal pillows, creamy white showers of flowers, delicate traceries of twigs against the sky, and from them they spun and made a woman with skin as soft as petals, hair like a shower of blossoms, hands as delicate as a tracery of twigs. Naked, she came into the world, as did we all, but she was already in the full flush of her beauty. And when Llew saw her, when Gwydion, his foster father, took the woman he had made from flowers by the hand and put her hand into Llew's hand, and then Gwydion put his hand under her chin and tipped up her head so that Llew could look into the deep dark pools of her eyes. He lost himself in love, or maybe in lust for her in that moment. And Llew said, "Who is this?" And Gwydion said, "This is your wife that we have made for you from flowers, and her name is Blodeuwedd, which means flower face." What draws me to the stories is the fact that they just show that people nowadays, our generation, this generation, the younger generation, and people who lived long ago, people that we don't know how they lived, we don't really know much about them, but they had the same concerns and hopes and dreams. They made the same mistakes and had the same strivings and yearnings that people still have today. And so those questions that people are asking themselves in the stories, how will I find someone to love? What is my purpose in life? How can I live a good life or fulfilling life? Those are the same questions that are asked now. Gwydion then led his warband up over the moorland, up to Tom and Amir, up to Llew and Blodeuwedd's castle. And when she heard that Gronw had been killed, that Gwydion was coming after her, and there was no one there to defend the castle, for all the warband had gone with Gronw. She and her women fled, and they fled up from the castle, and they fled up over the tops, over the moorlands, and the story says that the women with Blodeuwedd were so afraid, so terrified of the wizard, looking back over their shoulders so often to see if he was close to them, that all of them fell into the lake and were drowned, which is why it's called Llyn Morwynion, the Lake of the Maidens. Maybe it was much smaller and much boggier in those days, so it was harder to find. But whether they were unlucky or foolish, they were all drowned, and that's why Blodeuwedd was alone, all alone, on the hilltops when Gwydion came up over the ridge towards her, and she stood her ground. And when he stood over her, he put his hand under her chin and tipped up her head so that he could look into the deep dark pools of her eyes. And she said, "So, have you come to take back the life that you gave without ever asking whether it was wished for or not?" And when he looked into her eyes, he saw that there was more to her, more than he had made from the oak and the broom and the meadow sweet. And he saw that though he'd made her, now he could not unmake her. So he used his power to do what he could, and he changed her. He changed her shape, he changed her utterly. Her skin, soft as petals, became tough and leathery. Her hair, like a shower of blossom, fell away. Her hands, as delicate as twigs, crooked and curved into cruel claws. Feathers pierced her flesh. Her features drew together into a little hooked beak. Only her eyes, the great dark pools of her eyes, remained unchanged, so that, looking back at him out of the face of an owl, Blodeuwedd looked into Gwydion's eyes. And she turned her head this way, she turned her head that. She opened her beak, she gave a low call of an owl, and then she spread her wings, and she rose silently, and she flew away into the west. And they say that even today, Blodeuwedd is the name that is given to owls in this part of Wales. And they say that that is where the story finishes, and that is the end of the fourth branch of the Mabinogion. Dyma fy stori I ti. Celwedd neu wir ydy hi. Stori ffug neu stori wir. Yr un ydy ystyr. And that translates, these words come from me to you. Are they lies or are they true? And if they are or if they're not, so what? They come from that 800-year-old book, and they came into the book from the storytellers who told them before ever anyone thought of writing them down. And whether they were told as lies or as truth, they still have something to say to us, even today.
So this is the high point of the hill. I suppose you could say this was the summit. And the thing that's so extraordinary about this place, one of the many things, is that it seems to be guarded by mountains in each direction. So to the east is Moel Shabod. It's hidden under, the summit is hidden under cloud now, but it's a big mountain. And it's the sort of first big mountain you come to when you come from the east or the northeast or the southeast. So it's like the Sentinel Mountain. At the foot of it is Capel Cerrig and then Betas y Coed. So that's the guardian mountain in that direction. And then over here to the south, we have a hill which is, the Welsh name translates as the Hill of the Young Bullocks. I used to think, bullocks? I'm going to put bullocks up there, surely. And then later I realised, actually it looks a bit, you can't see down because the tree's in the way, but it looks a bit like elephants. And maybe if you've never seen elephants, then bullock is a good second. So maybe because it looks like young bullocks. And then to the west is Moel Hebog, Hawk Mountain. Again, clouded over on the summit, but when it's clear, it kind of looks like a hooded hawk with its wings spread and ready to pounce. So you can see how that might have got its name. And then to the north, here, again, the summit is under cloud, is Aran, which apparently could be translated as long legs. Long legs. And if you think about it, it does look like it's got long legs all the way down to the horizon, across the horizon, filling half the sky. And Aran is the sort of pointer to and mask of Wyddfa, which is Snowdon, and that's just on the other side. So Wyddfa, Snowdon, highest mountain, the sacred mountain in the British Isles since time immemorial, in my opinion, and so a place of pilgrimage for a long time. But people wouldn't have gone and stayed on the mountain. It's too inhospitable. So what would they have done? They'd have come here, to this place, this well-protected place with mountains in the four directions. And it's to here that the young Merlin was brought. I have a passion for this place and for the stories that are associated with it. I think of it as a kind of a tribal temple. You know, it doesn't have any of the sophistication and grandeur of a Greek amphitheatre, for example. You know, there's hardly any built environment here. There is, but not in any way comparable. And yet nature has somehow done it for us. Nature has created this hill with a high point protected by four great mountains, and in the heart of it, this hollow. The reason there's a hollow here is because this is a volcanic plug. The only one in all of this area. None other mountains are like this. Perhaps that's why it became associated with dragons, because dragons are associated with fire, and so are volcanoes. The pool that you see now was choked with rushes. You see the rushes that grow around, that was all through there. You couldn't see the water. And it had been like that for decades. Just about a year ago, I was here with a friend. I thought, I wonder if we could actually pull up the rushes. And I, with my bare hands, started to pull up the rushes and discovered that you could. And so came back over the following couple of months, with a fork and buckets, a rake, and slowly, and with some help sometimes, slowly cleared the rushes. Suddenly, the eye had opened. The eye of what I now call Omphalos, which is a sacred centre or a world navel, the eye of the Omphalos had opened. I've come to think of that work, clearing the pool and opening the eye, as mythic maintenance. Because you can maintain myths by telling them, but actually this is about maintaining the place as well. This is about being the gardener of this place, the custodian of this place. It's like you're combing the hair of the goddess when you do this. It's like making her look her best. What I was looking for was this sense of sacred place where there was a story and a kind of spiritual connection somehow to ancestors. And of all the places I have found around here, and there are, a lot of extraordinary places in this part of the world, but this is the kind of pick of them. This is the place that, for me, kind of holds it all. I think there are a lot of people now who don't find the Christian story very convincing, but they still want something spiritual at the heart of their lives. So many people go, to South America, to the Native American traditions, to the East, Buddhists and so on, or try to get inspired by other indigenous peoples, if you like. But usually those people, those shamanic teachers that they go to, will end up saying, look to your own roots. And here in Britain it's not so easy to find our roots because there have been so many waves of invasion, so much has been lost and destroyed. But nonetheless, there's still quite a lot here. Then in addition to that, of course, there are these stories, the Mabinogian stories, which have their roots before the coming of Christianity, before the coming of the Romans. We can glean quite a lot from the landscape and the story, as well as other folk traditions that have been passed down. The dragons are awake. There is a disturbance in the land. The red dragon is the people of Britain, the ancient ones, the bearers of tradition, those who've been here since the beginning. The white dragon is the Saxon invader, the greedy, grasping newcomer. And so they will chase each other back and forth across this land, until such a time as arises the boar of corn. Only then will peace return to this land. And he will be the noblest king. Tales of his exploits will be as meat and drink to the storytellers who relate them in ages to come. But chaos and destruction will return. There will be centuries of it. Until the people in wood and iron coats come and restore the eagle to Mount Rwydma. Gold shall flow from the hooves of bellowing cattle, silver from the lily and the nettle, from the first to the fourth to the second to the third, the thumb will roll in oil. Though the goddess be forgotten, the soil will become fruitful beyond man's need. The fatted boar will proffer food and drink. The hedgehog will hide his apples in London. Underground passages will be built beneath the city. Stones will speak, the sea to France will shrink, and the secrets of the deep will be revealed. But beware the ass of complacency. Swift against goldsmiths, slow against ravenous wolves. Oak trees shall burn and acorns grow on lime trees. The Severn River will flow out through 7 mouths. Fish will die in the heat, and from them serpents will be born, and the health-giving waters of Bath shall breed death. But root and branch will change places, and the newness of the thing shall seem a miracle. The healing maiden will return, her footsteps bursting into flame. She will weep tears of compassion for the people of the land, dry up polluted rivers with her breath, carry the city in her right hand, the forest in her left, and nourish the creatures of the deep. With her blessing, man will become like God, waking as if from a dream. Hearts open, filled with light, radiant face glowing like the rising sun, shining eyes like twin silver moons, radiant ears shimmering with song, shining lips that dance over words, words of magic that burst into the air becoming swallows. The soul shall walk out. The mind of fire shall burn. And in the twinkling of an eye, the dust of the ancients shall be restored.